Well, kia ora, welcome everyone to the Risk and Assurance meeting today, which is Valentine's Day. We are live streaming today for obvious reasons with COVID and Omicron, etc. And it's good to see that we're all spaced out and adhering to the rules in these interesting times. So welcome everyone. We do have a quorum. We've got Tanya and Geraldine joining us by Zoom. Kia ora, how are you? And I think Mayor Sandra's on her way as well. All right, so let's kick off. We do have one apology from John Park this morning. He's got a family matter to attend to, but I said I would give him a catch up after today's meeting. So he's all good to go and had a few questions he wanted raised from the agenda, and I've got those. Kia ora, Nigel, how are you? Second item on the agenda is conflicts of interest. Are there any items today that give rise to any concerns around conflicts? Are we all pretty good? Excellent. Thank you. All right, item 3 on the agenda is our last meeting we had was Monday the 29th of November. Those minutes have been previously circulated. Could I get somebody to move those, please? If there's no queries. Geraldine, thank you. Second, Simon. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. That's great. Right, the first significant item on today's agenda is the emerging risk review, and there's probably never been a better time for this committee to actually have this grown-up discussion around the emerging risks. There's a lot of change and issues going around. So Bruce, Steffi, Regan and myself met a while ago and said, what are some of the topical big picture risks we should at least be kicking around? Can't solve them, but we need to be talking about them. So Regan, I'll throw that over to you, and just, if you wouldn't mind, just update the committee that our Tier 1 policy as well is going in front of Council shortly. So I'll throw it over to you. Thanks, Regan.
Cool. Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yes, so I just firstly, the meeting on the 24th of February, the report to Council will include the updated framework and strategic risk register for final adoption, so that would be a good step forward. But in the meantime, this paper does cover a couple of items on that register that we consider are increasing in uncertainty over the next little while, and a few items that are not on the register but certainly are areas where there's growing uncertainty and probably likely to cause us some issues in the medium term at least. So the known issues that we're flagging here are just the climate adaptation. There's a lot more pressure and talk about making some real action in this space, which is going to, I think, compound on some of the other inflationary pressures that we're already feeling. The operations failure really refers to reflecting our current COVID situation. It's realistic to think that we will be facing a few absenteeism over the next little while, so that is increasing that risk profile. And the financial sustainability is really just reflecting the challenge in trying to keep up with the work program, which is reasonably ambitious, on top of all those other things going on. So that does mean there's quite a challenging time in the current register or view of things. And then in the emerging space, 4 key issues: inflation pressures, supply chain, mostly a result of COVID impacts, talent, retention and attraction, again, that's a post-COVID world issue, and energy costs, which are putting in there as an issue that seems to be emerging in a few other areas, particularly in England. They're already facing some of this as a problem, and I think going forward it's likely to see us face similar problems. We're already seeing petrol prices starting to creep up. So those were a few things just to put on the table for discussion and consideration of the committee.
Thanks, Regan. And I think the key for this really is a lot of this we can't solve, but it's encouraging to hear in chatting to Bruce before the exec team and councils are talking about these issues all the time, because all we know is that the change is constant and rapid, and we can't beat inflation. You know, it's hard to attract talent, but these are issues that are definitely front of mind, and just really wanted to seek assurance that they are certainly front of mind with your risk meetings, Bruce, for the next exec team.
Through your chair, yes, excuse me, yes, they are. We have a lead team assurance meeting on a bi-monthly basis, and these issues are certainly top of the agenda for us to be talking through and making sure we're aware of what's going on and the challenges that they're posing at us. Yep.
Through you, Chair, I think, yeah, and I think this has been well signalled. We had our council future planning day last week. You know, there are some real headwinds. You know, lots of use of pejorative terms, Regan, like reasonably ambitious. We do have an ambitious work program. We have a really large capital delivery work program, and I think we're fortunate that in terms of a lot of our big pieces of work, where you know, in the market with contracts in terms of some of our big projects, again, the benefit of hindsight, and you know, reflect on some really capable staff, like the decisions that we made previously to pre-order a lot of componentry and take that risk ourselves, you know, have stood us in good stead. But we do have some risks that we're going to face in the next 3 to 6 months, depending on how some of these risks play out around absenteeism levels, supply chain issues, that will put fiscal and time issues into some of our existing sort of projects. But right now, I'm looking at it, and Bruce, you know, usually over the detail, like we haven't got any huge pieces of our capital work program that isn't through market contracted, and that we're in, you know, that we're in build. So I'm really grateful that that's the position that we're, you know, we're in. But I think looking out to the next, you know, capital work program, there's probably some quite strategic things we're going to need to stand back from in terms of saying, you know, is everything that we had in the, you know, plan for 22-23. Just need to see how this plays out around continued supply chain, labour shortages.
That's great. I just had one more quick question, and I'll throw it over to committee members. Kia ora, Bronwyn. I think that's you up there. How are you? Hey, just the...
Morena, I'm great, thanks.
That's good. Some other commercial boards and other discussions with people, it's the human issue, right? Because if Omicron, you know, knocks 73 council staff can't come to work, has there been a lot of work, Bronwyn, done about how you will cope in some of those critical areas if people are unwell?
Thanks, Chair. So we, late last year, when Omicron raised its head, re-looked at our business continuity plans in light of what that was looking at, and took some steps to try and, in some of those critical areas, actually increase our staffing numbers on the basis that some of those things, a good example is the cemetery, you know, really genuinely needs to keep going, and may, hopefully not, but may actually see an increase in required services there. That said, it is coinciding with a difficulty in the employment market. You know, it's proving a little harder to find people, so it's a wee bit of a perfect storm. But every area, and we focused first on the critical services area, did good work around their business continuity planning, and a number of our areas have already moved into bubbles to try and reduce the exposure points for staff. We're really conscious that those critical services are the ones that need to be kept going, and that the focus needs to be on those. That said, we think we've done all we can, and we're, you know, going to have to probably, you know, make a few decisions as things evolve and as we see what happens. Jenny, have you got anything to add on that, or Craig, because a lot of the services are in your group?
Morena, yes, I was going to actually talk to us a little bit in my next report, but I'm happy to talk now. Basically, we've focused and we've registered our critical workers through MB so that we can ensure that we've got rapid antigen testing regime in place for them. At the moment, we've started surveillance testing which we're doing weekly. And also basically when we start to have scares and we need people to get rapid testing so they can return to work, we'll implement that in accordance with what MB have put in place.
Through you, Chair, probably not a lot more to add from Bronwyn's comment, but I guess a key part of the business continuity and the bubbles was also a defence mechanism around the close contact management processes that Ministry of Health have put in place, and the ambiguity around access to getting the testing, and really just trying to minimise the potential for, I guess, what you could call own goals, where for no fault of people, sort of 1 turns into 5 or 10 affected. So we've split, particularly across all the essential services, everyone out. So even if there was someone in an office who Ministry of Health decided wanted to make everyone a close contact, which they seem to be working away from, we won't suffer from taking the entire team out, particularly for those who need to work on site. So on the site, so it is impossible for some to work at home and some to work in the office. So what we've got is just operational work areas, separation of breaks, break times, just to mimic keeping that level of separation.
I'm happy to wait for my question if people want to keep talking about the impact of COVID, because that's probably the biggest risk, and then go into my other questions. So I haven't got one on COVID, but if other people have.
Right. That's fine. Just on Regan's paper in general, that's fine.
Okay. So I had a couple of questions. Climate adaptation. Council is responding to the risk of climate change more than what's expressed in here. And I'm just wondering whether all of Council and Council staff are up to speed with what is happening in terms of building consents and the requirements of the coast, and also the coastal hazards joint working group with the other councils.
Through you, Chair, I think there's a growing awareness of that work. I think the point that Regan's made with this is that it's a continuing risk that we're facing. We do have a number of things that we're doing on different fronts to manage that risk, but probably the awareness across the organisation is growing. But there's still probably what this is sort of referring to is that the pace of change is accelerating on us as well, and when we need to be doing more in that space.
I've got a couple more questions. Now, twice this year we've heard that we're not going to meet the financial forecast at year end. I'm just wondering when we will receive the estimate of what that will be.
Yeah, through you, Chair, and I'll hand to Bruce. As I think I said last week, we're due to have ops and monitoring this month, and we will be presenting half-year results, but also a view of the forecast through to year end. And and I think as we are signalling, and we'll need to get into the detail around the ranges and the assumptions that underpin it, is off the back of things were pretty tight. Sort of as we headed in towards the end of the year, with some of the impacts of the first lockdown, most notably on activities in council like tourism. It's fair to say that some of the forecasts and the assumptions about what's going to happen over the next few months, we will be forecasting a year-end sort of deficit, but we will work that through at ops and monitoring off the presentation of both the half-year reports and the forecast through to year-end.
Yeah, I've got two more questions, and the first one follows on from that, which is the projects that may get chopped because it's unsustainable. Would we be receiving some commentary on that at the same time at ops and monitoring? In the 2022-23 year, as Nigel said before.
Hadn't planned on giving an update on that at that point. It is something that we're working through and looking at the annual plan going into next year in the capital project program that we had set down for 22-23 in light of, you know, how far we'll get through the 21-22 program and the impacts that that'll have moving forward. Craig, did you have anything to add to that?
Probably not at this stage. There's a couple of different trends and flows running with some of the capital projects a bit behind with the loss of time. But we've also got some really headwind challenges in the OPEX space that we're just working through with compliance costs and cost escalation. So we're just trying to make sure we can pull for a balance. I think, Bruce, as part of the annual plan, as you said, we just have to work through what's reasonably achievable and consider how we finish off this year as well.
So what month are we talking about for the annual plan review?
So we'll bring to you a paper or a conversation and a paper on annual plan later this month, and that'll go out for adoption or get approved for adoption end of March, full consultation in April, and final decision making in June. It might be that, you know, some of that the capital program and the more I don't want to use the word mundane, but the more run-of-the-mill business as usual capex that we have to do, renewals and the like, that we might make some adjustments to the annual plan later and closer to adoption rather than full consultation. It just as we get a better picture of what's in front of us.
And my final question is, also we talked about last week at the Future Planning Day is Waka Kotahi funding and the reduction of 20 million a year. That's right, isn't it? And our discussion was what level of service we give, but I wonder whether we need to have a bigger discussion because we can't just keep giving a reduced level of service, and whether we need to be a bit more proactive in lobbying to get some more funding in the future and how we're going to handle that.
Yeah, so I'll make a couple of comments and then through you, Chair, anything that Craig wants to add. The 20 million shortfall, I think it ended up being slightly smaller than that, but it's over the 3 years of the National Land Transport sort of plan. It's not a per annum figure, but the strategic issue that we do have is this is the third consecutive NLTP where we haven't had the level of co-share funding to maintain the existing network that we've got. So I think the strategic issue, and Mayor Sandra and I talked about this with Waka Kotahi on Thursday, is the issue. If you take the mantra that this council's adopted around you look after what you've built before you go and build a whole lot of new things, that is the issue that we fundamentally have in our transport network, is that we don't have the level of funding to maintain the assets to the existing quality levels. And this will be some of the the work that Craig will be bringing back and talking to councillors about around the set of options, particularly as it relates to one of the key strategic priority areas that this council adopted through the long-term plan, which was the just give me my roads. And clearly we're going to have to present some sort of choices for councillors to sort of make whilst I think increasingly the job for a place like Hawke's Bay through our Regional Transport Committee is building and advocating for a greater level of investment than we have been getting into the Hawke's Bay roading network in our priority areas, and that's probably been most pressing example of that recently has been State Highway 5 as our strategic sort of corridor. So at a number of layers, I think these conversations over the coming months.
Just as a suggestion and a follow-up from what Olin was suggesting, it would seem like you've got to get a handle on this current financial year, which finishes in June, but pretty soon after that handle, infrastructure businesses are looking at 1, 2, 3 years, because it really is sort of a blob together with carry forwards and stuff. So I think you're saying you do have to catch the tiger by the tail of the current year, but pretty soon after that, you've got to say, what's this going to do to us in years 2, 3, and 4? if a lot of our stuff gets backed up and we struggle to get men and women in overalls to do the job. So I think that is a pretty valid question to look out beyond the end of June. But you got to corral June first, and then say, right, what are we looking like those 2 years after that?
And all I'd say through you, Chair, is that yes, we need to do that by the very nature of the last few years on council. Whilst we talk about an annual capital works program, in reality, we've put in place a number of contracts that are multi-year in their dimension. So things like yes, we're at the tail end of the 18 months of our water improvement program, but that's tens of millions of dollars going into next financial year that is all contracted, procured, actually being built. If you look at other big bits like land supply for housing, I mean, in the last 2 or 3 months, we've probably let nearly $30 million worth of civil contracts for land supply across private and council land development. So in terms of some of the big pillars of our capital works program, by their nature, we've got a pipeline that goes beyond the next 12 months. But having said that, whilst we've had record levels of capital delivery, we're still going to have to stand back from this and say, what's this year's capital budget, Bruce? 170 million with government funding and carry forwards, and we'll do probably 120, 130. The starting point's still going to be, carry forwards plus new capital, and we're going to have to bring that picture to the council table around what's our assessment of what that looks like in the context of the market and all the current challenges around supply chains, price inflation, people.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Sorry,
Kia ora koutou katoa. Morning, everyone. Lovely to be in the chamber this morning. How lovely to see your faces. It's fantastic. My comment and question was just around the same as previous speakers. And thank you for your response, Nigel. I think that, Regan, I think it's difficult for us in this committee to look at your emerging risks without the context, and so I think that stuff that's going to come back to ops and monitoring is really, really important for us in our decision making. And I think absolutely, John, it is about short, medium and long term, and the immediate term is, what projects are going to be impacted by energy cost, supply chain and inflation. And so we can have informed decision about what we can get on and do, and what needs to be left to perhaps 23. So, I think that's a really, and I liken this committee as an action to have some context around a one-pager about, what the next 6 months looks like, what projects could be impacted, and likely all of these, all of the things that you've identified here. So this committee can actually identify, what is it we're going to do and how we're going to manage through. And I also think that it's just really important to look at an agenda item every time in risk and audit around infrastructure. And I think that infrastructure, in terms of how we're delivering for all the growth, needs to come through this committee, and it needs to, for us to put a lens over this from risk and assurance and budgets, and how we're going to be able to deliver. So I just think there's a strong opportunity now for this committee to be able to, and John couldn't be here today, but if we are going to be doing this big capital delivery like we're projecting, we need to be fully understanding when and how and if. So this is the change, and we're in a climate of change. So it's been nimble and reflection, and just saying, well, does that park need to be completed at this end of this 6 months, or do we leave it to 23? It's like having that concrete information so we can make informed decisions on, you know, a new housing development's ready to go. Those people are ready to work. How do we nimbly, you know, change? And instead of, yes, we have our long-term capital works delivery, but how do we're in a different environment now, and we have been for the last 2 years, and we have to look at things in a different approach.
If I can, through you, Chair, I mean, I like that, and I think we should bring that back as one pages, but across all of those areas. So I agree with infrastructure. The thing I'm sitting here really focused on at the moment, in addition to infrastructure, is talent and people. So right now we have, in a lot of ways, and you know, acknowledge the great work that's being done by the team and led by Bronwyn. One level, I'm looking at data, like our turnover for the year. Bronwyn was at 13% for the calendar year just ended.
Sorry, just coming off mute. Yeah, so our turnover for the year just ended has increased by 1% to 13.1%.
So well below sector and other benchmarks, but also really conscious that the things that are going to be facing us and that we're going to have to be talking about with you as committees and with the governance table is right now the inflationary pressures in the environment, the cost pressures, the position that unions are taking around, so the assumed level of pay increases that we've built into annual plans, way too low relative to what a lot of our staff and the unions are now looking for, and where people are getting choices in terms of the wage price inflation in the in the economy. So those are some of the things that are going to start to get quite sharp, in addition to the infrastructure areas. So being able to have these conversations, I think, going to be increasingly critical over the next period.
And I think what's so intriguing is no matter how hard you try, you're always judged in hindsight. So the expectation is that there is a lot of planning going here. And I think Mayor Sanders' point is, Regan, is that this is a really good taster, and then we've got to go, comma, and this is what it really does mean in practical terms. And I think ops and monitoring, it's great that we've actually got that committee to run some of that detail through, but we could probably get a bit more granular here as well the next time, because I don't think any of us disagree with the risks you've raised and stuff. It's just flesh it out a bit more so we could possibly add some more to that. But just Simon.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Tan, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Tanya, is that the red button on up there? It is too. Sorry.
Didn't even see it.
Tanya, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Morning, everyone. It's been interesting sitting and listening to this conversation. I've just looked at the recommendations, and I think the recommendations need further building out. So yes, we are receiving the report, but I think we need to add information there about what we expect next time. And I do like that the further conversation comes back to this committee or council. Geraldine may wish to speak on ops and monitoring, but that generally is referring to what we have done rather than what is coming. So I think if there's going to be more work, it needs to be done through this committee or the more broader council committee.
Geraldine?
Just looking through the perceived risk for the future, I actually wonder whether there's a place now for a geopolitical risk. Looking at what's happening in Eastern Europe and looking at the capability of some of our significant markets to be disrupted, it's liable to have an impact on New Zealand Inc. Just with some stuff I was reading over the weekend, it kind of looks as if it may well be that things like our whole internet traffic, global banking, issues like that could potentially be impacted, given the extent to which the Russians have been involved in some of these interesting little areas and ways of disrupting commerce, trade, communication, etc. I'm not sure how to shape that up, but it is very definitely something on the horizon.
I agree. You're absolutely right, because if there is, an issue in Ukraine that affects fuel supplies, it affects gas to Europe, it affects all sorts of markets. So I think that's a good one to include in there. It's awesome. Thanks, Geraldine. Mr. Nixon.
Yeah, thanks, John. I wrote at the top, I went through the list. I thought, Reagan, it was a great list, very informative, and sort of cross-referenced everything I thought against it. And I sort of wrote at the top of my page, we're takers, not makers. We have to take everything that gets thrown at us. We don't seem to have a lot of control over sort of making it happen. There's three areas that I was particularly interested in. One is the energy one. The other is the disruption to supply chain, and secondly, the COVID issue generally, not necessarily in that order. Just sort of on the COVID thing, I noticed that the regional council have had to cancel a lot of bus services because they can't get drivers. And that, the drivers are not, they're not top paid, but they're not that badly paid. I think this sort of disruption could be what really hits us. And I look at overseas as best you can, and so try to take it aboard. And I think, what are we learning from overseas on the disruption that they've struggled, and how do we build that into our own thinking to make sure that we're prepared? Because we're going to have to be really light on our feet. It's so hard to determine the future at the moment that you've got to say, we've got to react, but we've got to react lightning fast, which means we actually need to think of some scenarios and have some idea what we do. And I've heard the conversations before with Geraldine and so on. Staff absenteeism, how exactly can we plan for it? Do we have a ranking that says, well, I presume we do, but these are the most important jobs. We've got to have the three waters. If that doesn't work, we're stuffed. And then it sort of cascades down from that. In the middle of that, you remember a few months ago, we made a decision not to open Splash Planet. And I thought, I was very strong in favour of not opening it. And I think we made an outstanding decision there. I think we thought all the issues out. I think we've got to start thinking of so many other areas in that sort of light. What are the consequences if we don't do something? How will it impact on this organisation? Will we still get through? Because we've got to get through, because we provide such essential services to the community. I think we're more important than government, to be honest, in this sort of area. I hope that goes live. So that's the first thing. The COVID thing sort of really worries me. The next thing, and this sort of bounces onto my second point, which I discussed with you before. Most of the world has been heavily affected by COVID, except one country, almost the most important country in the entire supply chain, that's China, which has had very little COVID. I don't believe they can avoid it. It is just going to come there like it's coming here, like it's coming everywhere. And the disruption to supply chains could just be almost beyond comprehension. Are we thinking about that and how it might affect us? Because we have to think beyond this council specifically and think about the whole of the country, because if the country's affected, we're affected one way or the other. So that's sort of part of the issue there. On the energies, on energy, and Geraldine's right. I look at things that are happening in Europe, the Ukraine particularly. Germany gets 50% of its gas from Russia at the moment. That's just for example. And you think, where's that going to head to? Germany and other countries are determined to cut off the purchase of gas. So where does it come from? What does it do to prices? I can see this just going boof, boof, boof all the way through the economy. I don't know how it's going to pan out, but it doesn't look good to me if anything happens there. And I look at our own energy situation. We've stopped exploring for oil and natural gas. And yet if you look around the world, usage of these things is actually going up all the time, which sort of starts to come into my third subject, the climate issue. Now, which is something that really interests me. I wrote to councillors last week, as I have done on a number of occasions on this issue. Because to me, the risks with the climate change are, one, government and regulation, because I think this is the thing that we really need to try and anticipate what we might be hit with. And the second thing is public opinion. And I did not support the initiative for a climate emergency because I thought we weren't really treating it like an emergency, but we're somehow going to have to address this issue because we don't want it coming through the doors and we're being forced to act when we haven't even thought about how we might act. And we need to make sure what we do now is consistent with what we think the pressures will be in the future. So those are the sort of three things, Reagan, just building up on what you wrote. Some of it's new and some of it's just reinforcing what you said. And when we're finished, I'm happy to move it. But I think Tanya's right. Maybe we need to just expand that thing a little bit.
I think what you've really raised there, though, Simon, which is absolutely crucial, is some things of what you've just described, Council, is 100% taker of the outcome. And what's really important, I feel, is that what you can control or what you can influence, you've got to really stay across that, like your works program and like your treasury and your hedging and stuff. There's a lot you can control, but there's quite a lot that you can't. And as an independent, I have found to date, this organisation has been pretty flexible and has responded to challenges pretty well. But the exec team will have to continue to be supported because those challenges will probably only really accelerate now, and you will have to work. So it seems like people, some organisations I'm associated with are trying to boil the ocean on issues they can't really influence. And the smarter ones are really trying to focus on what you can influence and be ready to roll with the stuff that you can't if you can. So I think that's a really good point. So Tanya, what did you had a good suggestion there about amending this recommendation. Have you had a chance to ponder what that could say?
I think we need to acknowledge the management reporting back to us and that what we've discussed, and that a further report will come back to this committee on these issues. I think keep it quite general, but we need to capture that management have been discussing the breadth of issues with us, and that we expect a further report back. And it can just be with it like this format again. So as general as that. Sorry, I'm operating off an iPad. I don't have the ability to type as well a full recommendation.
So why don't we, if we just slip in there somewhere, that management will bring back to the committee a more granular report based on the issues and based on the updated issues around emerging risks for our next meeting. I think that's a great idea, just to give it some context. Regan?
So through you, Chair, just to clarify, are we talking about how these emerging issues may impact our current work program?
The organisation in general? Yeah, so I think it's wider than just the works program, as everyone's been saying. It's basically.
Yeah, I was just thinking, we don't meet all that often, and in the context we're living in now, things could move at lightning speed, and I just wonder if we are going about this in the most appropriate way. I don't have a better suggestion at the moment because I don't really want to meet every 2 weeks sort of thing, but somehow we need to be quicker.
So why don't I work with Regan, have a look at what that more granular report could look. We can circulate it. I don't care if we have a half-hour Zoom meeting to chat about it. I think you're right, Simon. These are unusual times and we can't just be locked into a schedule. So if that works with you, Nigel and Regan, why don't we do that and come up with a 2 or 3 pager that fleshes those out? And we'll just circulate that by email. Oh, sorry, Tanya?
Just a quick question from me back to the management team. At what point do these emerging risks become actual risks or impacting on council? It's one I've just puzzled over because I look at them and I'm going, actually, many of them are real and they're happening right now.
That's a fair point. As soon as we start seeing significant impacts of these things, you would say that they're current issues as opposed to future risks. And I think you're right, the time horizon on most of these is fairly short. Even the energy one, when I when I was putting it in, thinking it was a more distant issue, is now starting to really pan out already. So yeah, things are moving quite quickly. And just to pick up on that, I think anticipating the future is going to be very, very hard. So what we need is some structures and some flexibility. So we need the right people around the table looking at the issues and being prepared to be flexible and deciding what the priorities are and responding. So internally, we do have the COVID team, and that team meets on a basis that's based on the demand at the time, so weekly to monthly, depending on how much change is going on, and we're planning and then putting in place the response for the organisation on as needed. So it's more about having the right people meeting frequently and being able to make decisions rather than necessarily locking in tight plans, I think.
Oh, Geraldine, sorry, thank you.
I think one of the other issues that we need to factor in is a whole thing around, I'd call it maybe civil disobedience. And I think the way things are playing out, I'm actually quite concerned that some of our staff could potentially be at risk. It won't be too long before we start being identified as quasi-government in one sense. And particularly as, you know, if we have to sort of crank up health measures or implement DHB policies, I kind of see, I mean, you know, at the extreme end, we can talk about physical danger, but we can also talk about things like rate strikes, et cetera, We've got some very strange attitudes being formed out there, and being fed from offshore as well.
Thank you. And what I just as a wrap, what I would like to ask the committee if we've got to be more nimble and we've got to meet, if some of these emerging risks become a real code red, as the risk and assurance, we should meet for half an hour so we can give some advice to the top table. That's our purpose, is we're a shortened line out. We should be able to move quickly. So are you guys comfortable if I stay closer to management? And if we've got an issue, whoever raises it, not just me, that we actually do meet. If it's half-hour Zoom call, we just do it, because we have to respond and be flexible. And there's probably a third of things we can influence, maybe 2/3 that we can't, but there's plenty of things we can. So if people are comfortable with that, let's just stay nimble and not wait to meet till April, May, or whenever it is next time. It's too long. So that'd be great. So you're right, Geraldine? Oh, yeah, I think so. She's good. So did you catch that modification to the recommendation? Are you able? You wouldn't be able to have a shot at reading it.
That's right. So it's A as in the report, and B that officers bring back a more detailed report based on updated issues around emerging risks and how that may impact on the organisation in general.
Just somehow get something that implies, you know, a lot more like footing, more responsive to. I think that could be point C, couldn't it?
Yeah, that's what you raised. Yeah.
Make that point C, is that the committee's has undertaken to meet more regularly as these issues evolve, or whatever you can put in there.
Yep.
That'd be great. So subject to those, we've now got an A, B, and C. Thank you. Seconded, Mayor Sanders, seconded Simon. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you, guys, because it is very interesting times. Jenny, we're on item 5. You've got your health and safety update report with some changes to regs and other bits and pieces. So would you like to take the committee through your report, please?
Certainly. So good morning all. Yes, we've got 3 things to cover off in my report, starting with the health and safety at work reform. So late last year, government signalled that they will be introducing a raft of new regulations this year. It's anticipated that those draft regulations will be coming out in the next few months, and then there'll be an opportunity to comment on those before they become finalised. And you'll see from the attachment that a lot of these regulations are based with high risk activities, which will obviously have a large impact upon our construction and infrastructure work going forward. So as part of that is a good opportunity for my team to work through and review how we control those critical risks around those areas as well, and having a really good look at the information that's coming out and see what impact it'll have on the organisation. But we are waiting with bated breath for the regulations to come out. However, I understand they will be based very similar to what Australian regulations are. So the second thing that the second thing that I wanted to cover off was the Health and Safety Forward Work Plan. I talked at my last report about bringing through some of the big pieces that we're working through over this remainder of this calendar year. And as you can see, there's a number of policies and procedures that need to be worked through. Obviously, this is going to be subject to whatever happens with COVID. My team will be doing their very best, but like all areas, we're subject to business continuity issues as well. So we'll have prioritised what we'll be working on and target those first. There's exposure monitoring currently underway, and I will bring back the information to next meeting. That'll cover off how well we're managing those health risks related to some of our activities. We're also completing our annual inspections at each facility at the moment. So again, I'll bring back that information to the next meeting so that you can see how we're progressing with that, meeting our legal requirements. The last area that I wanted to cover off was COVID-19 response. So as Bronwyn reported at the last committee meeting, we've got a dedicated team that are working through responding and helping the organisation through COVID-19. It's been working very well. We spent quite a bit of time at the end of last year working through with each team and each group what their business continuity plans were based on an outbreak where 50% absenteeism might occur, which is obviously what we're facing now. So I'm pleased to note that all teams have a plan in place and most have activated now. Each team has a different plan though, so it's not the same approach across the organisation. It's really tailored for their activities. We have been focusing our attention on the critical work streams, which are, at the moment we consider our 3 waters, our waste, our cemeteries, our building inspectors and animal control, which are critical services that need to keep running. It's not to say the others aren't important too, because we're focusing on them as well, but for those other areas, we've implemented that rapid antigen testing so that we can try to keep a pulse on those areas, because some of them are very small teams, and if we lose people, it's very hard to deliver services. We're also working very hard with our contractors. My team have been working with the contract managers and the contractors to make sure they have good business continuity plans as well for their activities, because as you know, we've got a lot of work on. We'd like to keep working through. We've got a really good stock of PPE, so we've given really good thought for making sure we've got sustained supply of masks, because we know that's going to be something that's going to carry on for a very long time. So that's a good supply chain that we have got, and we've got good stocks in place for that. So that's it for me really, but I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Through you, Chair, just to sort of add to, I guess, the comment that Jenny made around the health and safety forward work plan and the pressures that that team in particular are under. And Jenny probably slightly downplayed the impact that COVID's having on her team in particular around keeping this organisation safe and prepared for what we need to do. So I think the risk around the delivery of the work program going forward is, it's a bit more real given the impact that COVID is having on the health and safety team and our need to respond. With that being sort of the number one priority really as it is at the moment.
And I guess we've got traditional business critical risks and we've got COVID critical risks. So we've got, and they COVID critical risks become real if your people can't turn up to work and you've got services. So I understand you will be, so I guess what Bruce is saying in code is that your plan will have to be very flexible and you'll have to look after your team and just work with the exec team about what stays a priority, because in other organizations I'm associated with, the health and safety angle changes weekly, depending on what the heck's going on with the team. Just one thing, Jenny, before I throw it over to everyone else, is what I am seeing as well is the relationship with your external contractors is hugely important, because they can actually provide the support that you may need if some of our people can't come to work, and vice versa. So you're wise to stay very close to them, because you'd be surprised how much they can actually help you if there's a real urgent issue. So I think that's wise to keep very in tight with them a lot. But Simon.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Hard to make eye contact on Zoom, isn't it? Yeah, I know I can see her up there, but I got to keep looking down as well. In terms of the forward work plan, presumably a lot of that work can be done relatively remotely. I'm just suggesting it, but if I'm wrong, Jenny can correct that. So we can de-risk that part of the work plan somewhat from a lot of other areas where we have a lot of sort of face-to-face contact. And then in the middle of that, I was thinking, but what about families? I mean, because it's not just our workforce, it's actually the people they're in immediate contact with. Do we actually know what the exposure is beyond the immediate people that we're looking at? We can say stay at home, and then they're surrounded by kids that are down at Timata Primary. How do we deal with that?
Jenny,
yes, absolutely. That's a big. Sorry. Yes, absolutely. That's a big issue. We know that there's going to be an impact upon families and isolation, and actually whether people can work from home, because in an ideal world, we're at home, we're not sick, we can carry on working. But if we are sick, we're not going to work. But also if we're looking after children or dependents, or they're sick, that's going to have impact on what people can deliver as well. So we're trying to work through with the groups, prioritising their workload so that they know when they're down a certain number of staff what to critically focus on and what to put aside for when we've got more resources. But it's really, how long is a piece of string? We don't know the real impact until we're in the thick of it. We're just planning the best that we can to keep going with those critical services.
Plenty of people think.
Just one final one for me, Jenny. Have you had a chance to have a chat to Napier Port, who are testing their 100 most critical folks every day, and they're not using RAT, they're using saliva and stuff? Has that been an option we've thought about?
Yeah, Jenny can talk
yes,
to that.
so yes, I can talk to that one. So yes, we have had a reach out to them. They are lucky to be under a trial where they're allowed to use the saliva testing. We're unfortunately stuck with either rapid antigen testing, or if we do go saliva, it's got a lab turnaround of 2 to 3 days, which makes it similar to a PCR test. So it's not ideal for us. I would love to be able to do what they're doing, but they're very lucky that they've got onto that trial.
Awesome. Thank you. Were there any other questions from Tanya?
Yeah, just on that, this is where the world's a bit crazy. In Napier, there is a private company that does saliva tests with a very short turnaround. It's just that they're not government approved. And just is very frustrating when I look at it from the outside, thinking about what the best service we could possibly give our community would be to give our critical workers very quick tests. So I feel your pain, but I would also like to just acknowledge the work that you and your team are doing to guide us and this organisation through this time, to make sure that our lead team and their senior staff are being asked the right questions to be able, so they know what to focus on. So yeah, just thank you to you and your team for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. That was, I'm sure we all agree with that. This is year 2.5, so to still be keeping the energy up, it's well done to you and your team. But keep up the good work. Thanks very much. Rightio. Bronwyn, this must be your shortest report in history. We're on market reforms or local government reforms. It's probably changed since you typed it, so how are we doing?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, refreshing for me to write a short report. Craig will chip in here a wee bit too, and if we start with the Three Waters reform, as I say in the report in January, a transition information pack came out which we can send through to you. It's a public document, and there's various work streams, and it feels like, I won't say that they've absolutely kicked off, but it feels like they're kicking into action, and we have been appointed a council liaison person under the Three Waters National Transition Unit, which is part of the DIA, and he's made contact. Craig Thew and I have I've had a session with him, and I've had a bit of contact from the people and work stream, people and capability work stream. So it's sort of all growing. And I think it's probably going to take a fair amount of time over the coming months. We have just appointed Carly Price as our Three Waters Transition Manager on a fixed term appointment for 18 months to work with the team through the transition period. Craig, did you want to talk to that a wee bit, or is there anything else you want to add on the Three Waters reform?
I think you've probably been very kind around slowly getting going. So the National Transition Unit is really hitting the ground running as of the start of this year. So we have had our first information request around people, both in terms of our direct staff, not only the Three Waters, but any other staff who may be involved up to 10% in supporting water. So that will take some work to provide information, but also every source or contractor or supplier that helps service, whilst the NTU looks to pull together a picture. We're about to receive a data request to pull all of our data out to send to them before the end of June 22 this year. The NTU's intent is to have developed their investment decision framework, to have collated all of the asset data from around the country, to confirm their systems, and to have the staff transition protocols and procedures adopted and wellbeing engagement processes established. So they have some extremely lofty goals. We have reminded them that the rest of us are actually trying to keep the lights on, the water flowing. They are talking about backfilling and providing people, but we're already in an industry that's thousands short, so no one's quite sure where they'll come from. So that will be one of those risks that we'll have to manage alongside the day-to-day BAU. So Carly, I think many of you councillors may remember Carly Price. She did the 6 principles of drinking water training, has come out of a regulatory background, also done work in leadership management training and stuff. So she'll be helping us project manage not only the direct Three Waters elements, but also working through the rest of council to understand all those linkages, to make sure that our community is best placed as the organisation goes through a disaggregation. Probably the other key point to note is at the end of the month, the committee that's looking at the management governance structure is due to report back to the Minister, which will then lead through to the Water Services Entity Bill, either getting amended or not before it hits the House. So end of this month will be very interesting to see what comes out of that management governance review process.
And then on the matter of the RMA reform, John is holding a workshop on Wednesday around that. So I think probably best that information comes through him on Wednesday. And on the third main area, which is the more general local government reform, nothing's changed in that space from my last report.
Awesome, thanks Bronwyn. There, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you, team, through you, Chair. I guess governance is over this in a different way than operations and the staff. So these reforms are very much front of mind for governance, and And in terms of starting with the Three Waters, while DIA are asking for all of this information, there is a very, very strong direction that across New Zealand where the Three Waters gets to. So I just think you just need to take a breath really in terms of to answer everything that the DIA is asking or requesting at the moment. So we will be having, John, I'd like to see if you're available on the 24th of February to have a meeting with a group that the rest of the region has joined to challenge some of the thinking around the Three Waters reform and the bill. So and the legal requirements and the work that they're doing legally in that space. So we're going to we'll hear from both the chair and the officer that's running that. So to see if our council should be joining that group. The other part is the local government reform. There's an awful lot of work that is being undertaken at the moment, and that is to look at, and I think that we need to be considering what work we do as an organisation before we're going to be meeting with the commissioners, and that's soon. It's a couple of weeks or something. So we've had lots of workshops. We've had 2 now with LGNZ and all the mayors and councillors across New Zealand to consider this. All the chief executives and management team have been on those Zooms. We have considered everything from housing, not-for-profit organisations, employment, and all the options that could be part of the local government reform and how that could work for us in our district. So I think that there's and I hope that we do have management representation on those Zooms to contribute to the local government reform, because this is a significant change in direction, and we need to be at the forefront of that. So last week was partners with mana whenua and how we bring them and have our partnerships through a very, very strong direction at the table, and that was a very good Zoom on Friday. So there is a lot of work going in the local government reform, and I think it's really important that we're at the forefront of this, and that we are as an organisation considering all of our options. And you know, for us in housing and things like that we've been leaders in, how we bring that to the table. So it's not just about the chief executive and the mayor meeting with the commissioners, it's about our whole organisation putting their thinking caps on and thinking, what is it that we could be doing differently than what we're doing now, and what does the future look like? And things like bringing together not-for-profits is like a no-brainer for us, you know, and us being lead and you know, instead of the funding going through central government MSD, that it comes through and we support our own organisations. There's so much localism that we could be doing, and I think we're just a bit disjointed, Chief, on this in terms of what officers are saying and what governments are thinking about and learning and sitting into these meetings and working with colleagues across New Zealand. So I think that's just an important action that we need to be taking into account. And John, if you're available on the 24th of February to sit in for that Zoom meeting to understand what we do with the Three Waters. There's great power leading a national protest on Three Waters at the moment. The government are working through all, and that starts tomorrow here. And so there's lots of stuff sort of still going there. And while you have to get on with, you know, what this looks like from an operational perspective, if we join Entity C, there's also the opportunity to keep progressing with a regional model. So, like, we're still going here, and we're going long, hard and strong. We're not just doing all the work for the DIA at the moment. So, just putting that out there, just like that noted. Thank you.
So if I could, through you, Chair, and acknowledge your point, Your Worship, that there is clearly politics here and operational requirements, and respecting that they are different things, and that the politics of this and the council's position as the elected representatives of the community in terms of either advocating for the Hawke's Bay model or pushing back against the proposed reforms But unless I get a direction to the contrary, what we are bound by is a council decision that said when we signed up to a memorandum of understanding at the front end of these reforms and all the money that we took through the first phases, we are obligated to basically engage with the government and provide factual factual information, which is in effect what we're doing through the National Transition Unit. So I think there is just a recognition that there are two things going on here. There is a legitimate set of political issues, which is the council table, and then the things that the staff need to do by virtue of the agreement that we are bound with the Crown by, just in terms of the provision of information. On the second point, yes, we need to get more joined up, and I guess that starts tomorrow. We've got that as an agenda item with council tomorrow around the series of thematic workshops that makes up the proposed next phase of the future of local government, as the the Commission starts to shape up some of their thinking ahead of ultimately the end product as a report to sort of government by April of next year with some firm recommendations.
I heard fairly loud and clear from you, though, which is my view anyways, the right approach is generally the chairman or the mayor of the chairman of the board, the mayor and the chief executive have to stay real close so there's not inconsistencies. Because if with this breadth of reform, which is unheard of, you guys, you don't want to expose management because they didn't really know what the position was or vice versa. So I think it is a really good strategy that when the chair and chief stay pretty close about this is our position. If you've operationally got to do it by law and stuff, then you do it, but you've just got to stay consistent. So I think your point is a very good one. The approach has to be consistent so you don't get exposed going this different directions. So I think that's fairly clear steer for management, I guess, and the governors really, that we've got to be on the same page for this really.
So through you, Chair, then to question back to officers. So the Māori relationship and partnership future direction with reforms, did we have our Māori liaison team into that Zoom?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah.
So how then are we going to make sure that officers are across the rest of the work New Zealand is doing?
So I think this is we've had the information, I think, the first of 6 workshops that are scheduled. So we just need to make sure that across, I guess, both the governance table and from an officer's point of view, we've got the necessary thinking and connection into those streams of work that are happening over the next couple of months.
But historically, there has been good communication. It's just making sure that we're all on the same page, really, for this, because it's unprecedented levels of reform in about 4 different angles. So.
Yeah, and if I can, through you, Chair, and slightly more than that, I mean, this is part of the challenge for us collectively over the next period of time, is that the level of reform that's going on and the timeframes, trying to keep up with this, let alone coordinated, clear on where we're going to put time and resources on top of everything else, is what we do need to get joined up on, because across whilst we're talking about big reforms like RM reform and Three Waters reform and future of local government, we're also dying under the weight of every week new government reforms coming out around review of the civil defence system, proposed major changes to sort of wastes and levies, and it is I'd be being dishonest if I said we could be over everything that's going on in the government reform space and everything that's going on in our space around COVID, the delivery of our work program. And so we're going to have to get really, really clear on the kind of hierarchy of where we put time, because right now, and there's some obvious areas, I'm not saying, like future of local governments, sort of key in Three Waters, but I'm just conscious that the level of proposed reform is, it's almost, slightly overwhelming in terms of the scale and pace of it.
So,
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, a lot of what I wanted to say has sort of been covered. I mean, this is somewhere between significant and profound, isn't it? You know, I mean, it's just big, however you look at it. And I guess the thing that concerns me, just as a councillor, is I wonder at which point we start to work out the firm details of how we deal with these reforms. I'm particularly thinking of Three Waters. I mean, Three Waters, we lose, you know, I don't know, 30 or 40% of our business. That affects our sort of our rates approach, might affect representation. And when do we hear about it? I'm more concerned about when do we actually start to hear about our reaction as a councillor.
Well, through you, Chair, I think, again, just to sum up where we're at right now, I mean, clearly, you know, what's not in dispute is that this council and the region, the set of councils in the regions have a current position, which isn't about the status quo, but it is about, you know, the Hawke's Bay model. Clearly, we're at a space, as has been outlined by Mr. Thu, that, you know, we're expecting the government-appointed group to report back at the end of this month. At some point, decisions will get, you know, either affirmed or changed, and you know, and proposed legislative reform. Once we've got the shape of that, I mean, I think we're as organised as we can be, and that we know what the implications of what was proposed will be. We've appointed a transition, manager, and there will be a range of things that we're going to have to work through over the next 29 months. Whether it's a transition to NTDC in the Three Waters space, or it's a transition to a Hawke's Bay water model, whatever, there's going to be a range of change and implications.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I'm sort of thinking like, yeah, how's staff reacting? I mean, uncertainty is never nice wherever you are. Yeah, how's this impacting on staff, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, again, I think we've taken some principles, and again, my hat's off to Craig and sort of Bronwyn. We've been pretty upfront with the staff all the way through. I mean, the things that, yes, there is uncertainty. I think the commitments that have been made through the reforms have dealt with some of that to, you know, to what extent for staff in terms of what it means for me, but the fact that, you know, there's guarantees of jobs and same terms and conditions, but these are the things that we're going to have to work through in the transition to whatever that change ends up looking like. I think the one thing that we're all certain about, it won't be as the world is today.
And I would have thought Hawke's Bay was as well positioned, if not better than most, because of the alternative for the Hawke's Bay model. That's concrete, and then if the legislation comes out at some stage, then you're going to have some certainty. It might only be for consultation, but that's probably as close as you can get, really, isn't it? Tanya, I see you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, thank you. I've just been writing on my phone some notes, and I reiterate the concern raised by this committee regarding the reform, the quantum and the time and the energy that it seems to be sucking out of the organisation, that we have no control over. And I just wondered if there was any support by the committee for noting that in a recommendation along the lines of, let me find it, that this committee note its concerns regarding the quantum and scale of government reforms imposed on local government and the time and energy required by our council to meet these obligations, and then whether we can actually do anything about it. And that was where I was puzzling, that these concerns be taken to Zone 3 in local government New Zealand, or Mayor Sandra, maybe not.
Do you think it'd be helpful? I think what you're saying and what the Chief Executive said as well is that prioritisation. When you're faced with an avalanche of change like that, you've got to prioritise the 2, 3, 4, because we're still in the middle of a pandemic, right? That's not going anywhere. So if there's 7 or 8 things, there might be 2 to 4 things that are crucial that you stay focused on. So maybe we could add that, Tanya, to that recommendation, is that, you know, that prioritising remains a real key focus. because that's the key really, because you can't do everything.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, being on Zoom, it's really hard to read the room. So I'm just sort of going to lob that, and I'll leave it with you to make whatever the wording best suits what the committee think.
Thank you. Mayor Sandra.
Yeah. I think that is very wise counsel, and we have a very ambitious government, and they're not slowing down, and so we can resist or not, but it's going to go along without us. What I want for us as our district and as leaders of our district, for us to be in the best position possible for what will come, and I guess that the local government, after being at 2 Zoom meetings with the rest of New Zealand, I think it's we need to have a workshop sooner rather than later with the councillors, with the lead team, to look at what that looks like for us as a district. And you know, I'm proud that we have been leaders in many areas that we've supported, you know, like youth employment, and to hear the other day you know, how well we're doing with youth employment, so and housing, and so these things that we could be progressing with. But I think there's a whole lot of other opportunities, having listened to and being part of the national forum with both mayors, chairs, officers, councillors, and we've got 6, I think, councillors attending those meetings. So they've all, you know, we've got a team of councillors now attending, and they've been every Friday for 6 weeks. So they are very worthwhile, and there's some great ideas coming from them. So I think it's time for us to regroup with our lead team to have a workshop on what this could look like for us. I think there needs to be a team leader over the local government reform. I think that is, you know, it's whether it's one of the risk and assurance team, but it's actually looking at opportunities. It's opportunities of, you know, how we can provide some services for government. So whether the funding comes to local government or goes to central government, you know, we employ the people to deliver. So, you know, and we're local, we know the needs of our community. It's an exciting project, actually. And so, you know, we need someone who wants to pick up this and run with it, because it is great opportunities. You know, we've struggled sometimes to get the funding to deliver, and we do it ourselves under rates. But why wouldn't we take some of these initiatives that come through government agencies, and instead of us having to apply for the money through them, why wouldn't we do it as local government? So this is an exciting space in this time, and I just think that we need to be, yes, we've got to deal with COVID, yes, we've got to deal with day-to-day and management and delivery, but actually we've got to look at the future, and we've got to find what is going to be our future purpose if the waters are taken away from us. And I think that we can do some really exciting stuff in this space, and I'm excited about the reforms. So I'd like to think that we do that sooner rather than later, actually, as an action. Thank you.
I think that's wise counsel to keep continually reviewing those work plans, because management get the vibes from the top table of what should we really be focusing on through the chief executive. So it's important to keep reviewing that, because there is a mountain of stuff, but if you choose the right mountain, there's some really good stuff in there as well. But it's just, there is so much, but if you want to do that much really well, you have to sort of give that guidance and have a workshop to figure out what that is, because there's a lot of stuff, because that's probably the biggest risk. Every organization I see has got their initiatives list, and there's like 53 of them on it, and they're saying, how do we actually do the 30 that really matter and position us strategically for the future? And everybody's trying to figure that out post-COVID. What are we going to look like? So, but everyone's got 50 things on their list, and they're trying to figure out what are the top 25 or 30 I should be doing. So did you manage to figure out what that amendment could look like?
I've got A, that the report be received. B, that the Risk and Assurance Committee note its concerns regarding the quantum of timing, quantum and timing of government reforms that the council is being asked to respond to, and also note the time and energy that council and management are being required to put into these proposed reforms, and see that prioritising remains a key focus to assist in addressing these reforms.
Whether it needs to go into the recommendations, I've taken clear action out of this conversation that local government reform workshop pretty quickly, that's clearly goes without saying is a pretty big priority around thinking about our future. So we'll just take that as an action and get that organised. But it is probably a broader prioritisation, conversation, because the thing that to your point, Chair, is, I'm just conscious for all of the exciting stuff that we are excited on, both at our organisational, district, government reform level. We just need to be clear on priorities between sort of governance and staff, because I can guarantee we can't do it all, and so we need to be on the same page around what that prioritisation looks like.
Just having those targeted conversations, really, isn't it? Sorry, Geraldine, I didn't see your hand up there.
I guess in all of this, I'm really, really conscious of the psychological well-being of our staff. And I would hate there to be an implication in there that we would destabilise them by making them think that responding to government responses for information are optional, when in fact they are mandatory. Yes, we are progressing alternative solutions to things, but I just think that we need to be really careful. We need to be really careful around our staff, because in fact, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. They do need to do what is required of them at the same time. So we're not looking here at kind of civil disobedience. We're looking at progressing multiple streams at the same time.
Thank you, Geraldine. That's some wise counsel there. And I think that the flavour I got to from personally being exposed to lots of information requests is let's do what we have to do, and don't necessarily join the working groups that they want to go with it and stuff, because if that's just going to add a lot of work. But there'll be some stuff that we have to do, statutory have to do, and we just do it. But we don't have to become donkey deep involved if we think it's going to derail us. So I think that's probably the way to look at it. So that's good. All right, if people are, somebody come. I'll throw it over to Mr. Wilson, who has been very active with Bruce and Bancorp and doing a lot of good work to keep us across this. So please take us through your report.
Yes, thank you, through the Chair. What I've done is I'll take most of the report as read in terms of the standard stuff that we report on in terms of the fact of compliance and so forth. Council are compliant with Treasury Policy. There's a couple of things I would like to just go through though. Last meeting that we had, we talked about the level of cover that we had in terms of our debt, and this committee suggested we go away and just give them an idea of what the forecast position would look like once a number of contracts come into play over the next period of time. So what I've done is, and you'll see that in paragraph 4.1, we've got that graph on the top of the page there. And what we've done there is put in the forecasted position, which is that solid block of blue that you can see on the graph. The red line running through that solid block of blue is the current level of debt, and the blue block is where we have added, for instance, we've got a forward contract that's starting for debt maturing on the May 22. And of that maturing debt that's rolling over, which is 23 million, 10 million of that has already been fixed and was fixed on the 1st of July of last year. We got that at a terrific rate actually as well, in hindsight. And so that's now been factored into that blue block, and that's the first jump that you see. We have maturing debt of 21 million that's maturing in May of 23, and we can take a fixed contract out, forward fixed contract out from the 1st of July 2022. The reason for that is that LGFA will only allow us to borrow forward contracts in the financial year in which it occurs, so that's why it's not happening now, what's happening there. And what that will do is you can see that blue block being driven up by that associated hike, and it follows right through and improves our level of cover right through for the 7 to 8 year period there. There's a couple of good reasons for actually doing the fixed cover, and just as an aside as well, I sent you a email, I think it was on Friday, that I received from Bancorp, just giving some additional explanation as to their thoughts on the reason for fixing versus the swaps. And one point they made as well is that S&P Global like us to fix our debt in advance, well in advance for pre-funding and clarity purposes. So in taking the 23 million and doing a fixed on the 1st of July, that actually falls into play with their requirement of having pre-funding, clear pre-funding for the following 12 months. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone. Just going forward from that as well, what I did was I then did a notional graph over the page that's on 4.16, basically showing what happens if we take $100 million of our debt, which is related to water, out of play, and then what happens to our cover. And you can see our cover is well above where our debt would actually be, and actually in excess of what our policy states. With fixed, we don't know how the government, if the reforms proceed and go ahead, we don't actually know how they're intending to treat debt, how they're intending to treat the swaps or the fixed rate covers. Swaps are a little bit more complex from an outside point of view, because you can't stop a swap. You usually have to let it run or blend and extend them. Whereas with fixed debt, we're assuming they would just bring that over, but there are a number of different ways they can calculate what they believe they will take on from us. And at this point, we're not clear on that because the direction from Treasury isn't clear yet. So we're just waiting for that to see what comes through there. Just rolling through this report, and then I'll take questions. Happy to take questions. In terms of the Treasury policy, we review that every year at this time for this meeting, and we've just looked at that Treasury policy again in depth, and we've just recommended some changes there that put us in line with the LTP Treasury policy, which was agreed by Council back in July. The first is around the external debt percentage of income changing from 150 to 175 of revenue. That now would align the Treasury policy with the LTP and what went through there. Adjusting the maximum daily transaction amount by the Financial Controller on spend from $10 to $15 million. The 10 million was always aligned to the actual 10 million of overdraft facility we had a number of years ago. We actually increased that to 15 million 2 or 3 years ago, and this just aligns that. Otherwise, what would happen is if we needed that money quickly, I could approve for the 10 million facility, but actually we'd be hamstrung even though we had the additional 5. So this just aligns that and makes it operationally smooth to do. In terms of paragraph 5.5, we've removed the word check because, of course, we can't actually do checks anymore. So that's just an operational change reflecting the marketplace. And normally what happens is that we review it every year annually at this time. We noticed on page 26 it said within 5 months of the year end, which is usually by November. So because we've always been doing it in the February meeting, we thought we needed to update that to reflect actually what has been happening for a number of years for this committee. that's where we're at with that. I'm happy to take questions.
I just kick off an observation, if I can. You know, we've got average, we're adhering to policy. We've got a nice mix of fixed debt and swaps. Okay, average period of debt's 4 years, which is pretty good. And we haven't put too many swaps in play in case Three Waters does go ahead and we're exposed, holding on to a whole bunch of swaps. So the approach, a mixture of fixed debt and swaps, is a good one, and you'll get us to slightly above midpoint when you put these couple of things in play. So, and the average cost of interest is still below 3%.
Yes, it is 2.76, I think it is.
Which I had to make sure that wasn't a misprint, but so we're unavoidably going to get caught by higher interest rates as some of these swaps come off and some of this longer term debt matures, but you can only put yourself in a position to where you are, and the golden sort of rule is in times of turbulence, go to the midpoint. It's the safest place to be, which we are. So the observations for me, I was comfortable, and with the changes in the Treasury policy tweaks, but throw it over to others. Olin?
Yeah, so this question relates to the future of local government reform, and currently we've got a maximum Treasury limit of 250%, but we're at 175. Has there been any indication that that borrowing ability, that 250%, will be changed as a result of Three Waters?
No, we haven't heard anything through you, Mr. Chair, in that regard. I think the underlying assumption is sort of underpinned by the fact that
Sorry, Bruce,
majority of our income is rates, so that rates funding doesn't go away, other than we'll lose, if Three Waters happens, we'll lose something like 25% of our income and 50% of our debt. So in that situation, we're still in a solid space, and sort of a measure against income is still really relevant. So, and I haven't heard anything that suggests that 250% was actually 280% at the moment, and actually got to 300 in 2020, and they're looking at bringing it back slightly. Is going to change.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm generally supportive, as you can imagine, because locking debt down. The thing that I am reminded, of course, is there are two parts of debt. One is the cost and interest, and the second is the need to repay at some stage, which I never let go of. Just looking, I'm wondering about the advice we're getting, because interest rates are clearly going to go up. I mean, I don't think anybody would dispute that, and that's going to happen internationally as well. And I match that in with the $80 billion government had in its war chest, and the actions of the Reserve Bank with interest rates and loan to debt, you name it, all these mechanisms they've got. And I just wonder, it can't stay. The government can't keep borrowing $80 billion every 2 years to meet the emergencies that it faces. So that has to drop off. Does the advice that we're getting take that into account and sort of try and predict what that might mean? Because I'm damned if I know what it means, but when I see something abnormal, I think, well, it's not going to last, because abnormal things never last. But I'm trying to work out what advice are we getting that we can, that we need to be, again, nimble in order to handle it. But I do like all the locking down. I mean, I really approve of that at this stage.
Yes, so we have a meeting once a month with Bancorp, and they go through the entire global effects and then show what happens to the New Zealand economy as well. And basically what they were saying was around the swap predicted numbers that were out 7 or 8 years, that the swaps are pricing in very aggressively, which means the market is saying it's going to go this high. The view is, however, that when you look at where all the debt is, the debt that's been increasing is not in business, it's not commercial, it's all in residential.
Yeah.
Now, the residential people, they're borrowing, $80 billion more than they did last year. It's just horrendous, because, of course, that's what the market's telling them that the house prices are. The residential have a fixed ability to actually increase their income. They can't do much about that. So as a result, they're already near the edge. What the Bancorp is saying is that you can't repeatedly 5 or 6 times raise the price of the OCR and get it too high because the market can't sustain it. People cannot afford it. It's not in the government's interest to crash a housing market because they'll go out of government. They'll be voted out. They know that. They've admitted that themselves. So as a result, they can bring it up, but they have to be quite careful because if they bring it up too aggressively, they'll crash it, they'll pull the market. I think the last OCR rate, which was 0.25%, to give you an idea, I think sucked something like $48 million in cash out of the economy a week because all of those people were paying extra on $1 million mortgages, dare I say it, in Auckland, et cetera, et cetera. So they know that if they put it up, they will put it up because they need to cool the market, but they've got to be careful about where they take it to. And at the moment, the view is that the Bancorp swaps are, that the swap pricing for the future is too aggressive, and actually it won't get quite up to there because of the fact that you'll just about kill the debt, the ability to repay that debt in the sector that the debt is sitting, which is the residential market.
You've hit the nail on the head, because that was the conversation I had with you before the meeting. Yeah, because my concern is that there's an expectation of growing interest rates and all the rest of it, but that will in turn dampen the economy down and could be very significant for the various reasons you just outlined, because actually the increase in interest rates for housing, could easily turn into 100% increase, even if it's only from 1 to 2 or 2 to 4% or whatever.
Has a huge effect.
Yeah. So presume that has been taken into account because we could sort of see a bit of an initial lift because that's what everybody's expecting. Yeah. Then suddenly we're saying it'll keep going, but it may not, because if the economy starts to contract as a result of all that money being sucked out, the incentive is there to stop the process or even reverse it slightly. And that's the advice we're getting, obviously, which is what I wanted you to tell me.
So that's what they went into in depth in this last meeting that we were in. And I mean, in I think it was 2015, Reserve Bank overcooked it. It just about killed the market. And then they had to bring it back a lot quicker because, of course, all that residential debt got hit and they were starting to get hurt. So they pulled that back down. So they're going to be more cautious. Of course, it's going to go up, and it's going to go up a number of times. Who knows how many? Yeah. But they'll be watching very carefully to see where the hurt level comes in to people.
I hear Bancorp and a bunch of other market advisors, and I hear the exact same thing all the time, and only hindsight will prove whether they're right or wrong. They've got a theory of relativity about JIT board's going to cost more, and you just think that's great, but that's why if you move to the midpoint in times of volatility, that's the safest place to be, and if rates suddenly start going again, then you've just got to get above that midpoint. You might miss a little bit, but that's usually the safest thing, and they have advised, but just independent of our advisors, I definitely rate your views as well. So if you can monitor the swap rate as well as I can. So if you see things starting to trickle up, you shouldn't hesitate to do that, bearing in mind that if a lot of the debt disappears, we don't want a whole book full of swaps that we have to try to get rid of. But I think in times of volatility, because only hindsight's going to prove who's right and wrong here, isn't it really?
I'm pretty happy with that response. I mean, I just wanted to hear that we are getting advice along those lines, and
it's excellent. So are committee members comfortable that we're at the midpoint in compliance with policy and those handful of changes in the Treasury policy? That's reflected in the recommendation on page.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Alwyn, thanks for seconding. All those in favour? Thank you. I'm conscious we haven't stopped for a cup of tea, but we're coming down the home straight. Are people comfortable to keep rolling? Excellent, thank you. Item 8, Mr. GM Corporate, is yours. Is that your official handle, Lisa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pretty light report. I guess it just does pick up on a couple of points that we've already raised on the agenda. One is just really around the overview and the risks that we're facing as an organisation. And how that will impact on our ambitions going forward. The response, the COVID response and business continuity work that Jenny talked about, Jenny's health and safety team, supported by Regan and the and the team, Steffi and the team in strategic risk, done a fantastic job of supporting the organisation around business continuity and ensuring that we're prepared and nimble and able to react to be in the position that we're in. So that that's had a huge impact on their workloads over the last few months as well. We've talked about the half-year financial forecast, and I just put that in there as a bit. There is a risk that we're facing in that space. We did some we did some forecasting before the end of the calendar year that was looking pretty tight with the likelihood of a deficit position. The impact of going to red in the traffic lights has only heightened that risk, particularly in areas like Toi Toi. They had been forecasting for some revenue to come back in as we progress through the year, and we're having to reforecast that because a lot of that revenue opportunity won't be there for the balance of this financial year, but their costs continue to come through. So that is there. We will permit more than we've done in the past, incorporate into the half-year report forecast to year end, and just highlight that for council going forward. So I think that ops and monitoring meetings right at the beginning of March. And then just a little bit of an update on Audit New Zealand. So we haven't received their management letter as we would normally have done by now for the annual report. There's other councils that are still struggling to get their audits finalised. We know that they have quite a number of councils wanting to do LCP amendments for this year, incorporating into their annual plans. They require audits as well. They're hugely under-resourced, and we think there's a real risk in that space for us going into the 2022 audit later this year that they really won't be able to front in a timely way. It's just a factor of where they're at with staffing, and it's an issue with audit across the country. It's not just Audit New Zealand. We need to second young Mr. Wilson's daughter, who's just ventured out into the audit world following her successful completion of a degree. But there are some, but there's nowhere near enough auditors to do that work. So the action schedule's there, and really just have to take any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I think that's fairly straightforward. Everybody comfortable with that? Prepared to move that, Mayor Sandra, I think. Oh. Okay, thank you. All those in favour? Aye, carried. Thank you. It's great. Now you have to.
Yep. So, Mr. Chair, just before you move into public excluded, there's two public excluded items, and the reason that they're public excluded, the contractor report from Jenny on the health and safety performance does get into some detail specific to those organisations. So, for commercial sensitivity reasons, we'll request that is heard in public excluded. And the cyber security update, again, it does touch on some sensitive commercial information for the organisation. So to protect the organisation, we just have that conversation publicly excluded as well.
Thank you very much for that. So bearing that in mind, I'd like to move that we move into publicly excluded, seconded by Simon. Those in favour? Aye. Thank you.